We'll jump back in after that. So finishing up here, we have a few more weeks still to go through, just kind of summarizing everything and bringing everything together, and then also kind of stepping back and seeing the bigger picture of the whole love and respect thing. So we'll finish up probably here in the next 2-3 weeks. And it's been good, and like I said, hopefully it's been helpful to you. And I've recorded all the messages, all the lessons, so they're all, well, that's probably not true, because I think I probably forgot to hit record a couple times. But I tried, and they're all on, the church has a YouTube page for the Sunday school class specifically. It's there. It's also, I put it on our Facebook page as well. And I also have all the copies if you just want me to email them to you. You can have them and go back and listen at any time. The book is also available to buy on Amazon, and you can read through it yourself and find those things if you find those things helpful. It's helpful. We want our marriages to be what they should be, and if we're honest with ourselves, we fall behind sometimes. And if we don't, at least for me, if I don't have it in the forefront of my mind, like in front of my face constantly with things I want to improve on, I forget, I lax, I have other things that distract me. So hopefully it's something that helps you. All right, so Proverbs chapter 5, we'll go there here in a minute. We're down to, so we'll go through this part, love and respect. And I want to say here too, with the energizing cycle, it's going to spin. There we go. We went through the crazy cycle and how when we don't respond the right way, it makes each other feel and not get what they need, which causes us to react the wrong way, which just starts a cycle of craziness. Obviously, the energizing cycle is giving your spouse what they need the most. And I say need the most, but not exclusively, right? So, for instance, a husband does need to be loved, right? If all he ever is respected and he doesn't get the lovey-dovey stuff sometimes, not that that's his primary need, but he does need to feel loved and gushed over, right? That still exists. And the wife, where her primary need is not respect, that doesn't mean as a husband we don't have to give her respect, right? That doesn't mean we just treat her badly and don't give her the respect because she doesn't need it. She does. It's not her primary need, right? She needs love. She needs to know that you love her, but she still needs to be respected. So I don't want to go through all this and not at least mention that a few times, that it's not exclusive and only, but just those are the primary needs and we need to keep those focused. So, the heart's beating still. Okay. Next one. So going through our acronym of chairs. So conquest, hierarchy, authority, insight. We talked about relationship last week, and this week we're talking about sexuality. So you're thinking, well, you're still actually going to record this? Yes, I'm still going to record this because I'm going to do my best to be appropriate. But we are going to talk about sexuality because the Bible talks about it and because it's a pretty big aspect of our marriages. It exists. It's there for a reason. It is there to bring children into the world. It is also there for pleasure. And that's a good thing. And I think as Baptists, a lot of times we get a little scared when we start talking about those things and we feel uncomfortable and we don't want to talk about them. And I understand those things. And sometimes if you go, those are more counseling sessions, maybe one-on-one or, smaller groups. So we're going to keep it pretty broad and pretty general, but we're going to be honest about it. So the one statement I want to start this all with is the devil will do all he can to bring two people together sexually before marriage. And we see that in our world. We see that on television, on everywhere. That's just part of our culture. That's part of how the devil works. He wants to get two people unmarried together sexually and does everything he can to make that happen. But then he will also do anything he can do to keep them apart sexually after they get married. The devil knows that that's a key component of marriage. Key component of that relationship is the physical intimacy. And he wants to ruin that part of marriage and that part of that relationship before the wedding vows happen, before the God's order, right? He wants to flip it all out of order. But once you get married, and even with Christians, the devil will try to interfere in that physical aspect of the relationship. And because we all know, if that part of the relationship is not great, or there's frustrations or even anger or hurt feelings in that area, it will go to all other areas of the relationship. So it's important that we as Christian husbands and wives have our intimate relationship, the physical intimate relationship, under wraps and in a good standing. And we're human, so it's going to ebb and flow. There'll be times where it's frustrating and it's not what you want it to be. And you feel like you're being left out, or you feel like you're being shunned or unloved or told no or whatever the case may be, and it will cause frustrations and issues throughout the marriage. And so we want that to not be the case. So we want to understand, and we've been talking to the ladies, this is the husband's acronym. We're talking to the wives on what the husbands understand as respect and love. And so the book and the chapter focuses on the wives being for the husbands what they need, because typically, not always, but typically, the male part of the relationship is the more physical part. He is the one that wants the physicality more. He's the one that desires it and that needs it. And that is most of the time true. Not always, but most of the time. But we also have to understand it's not only about, well, the man wants it, so you got to give it to him no matter what. Right? It's not about that. And I don't want to take that approach. We're going to talk about that some. But I want to take the exclusive approach of the husband is the sexual being, and so the wives need to do whatever they need to do to fulfill that. While that statement is true, there's also the flip side where husbands, it's not always about us. Right? It's not always about our needs. And that's the pull back a little bit. That's the goal of the love and respect, is that it's not about you. Whoever we're talking to. Wives, it's not about you. The relationship's not about you. Husbands, the relationship's not about you. It's about giving what the other person needs the most. So that means sacrificing what you want. That means giving up your strongest need to fulfill his or her strongest need instead. And that also applies physically. That also applies in this relationship. So sometimes there could be issues of misunderstanding, right, about the needs of each individual, about the needs of the husband, needs of the wife. There can be misunderstanding, or there can just be ignorance. I don't know if ignorance is a word. It's maybe not, but you understand what I'm saying. We can ignore what the other person wants or needs because we're focused on what we want or need, or the frustration of not getting what we want or need. But we can be a misunderstanding about what the needs are, right? And if we go back to pink and blue, the wife typically, mostly, not exclusively, not only, but the wife usually wants openness, right? Intimacy as far as understanding and transparency, openness and closeness. She wants intimacy and affection without all the sexual touching, without all the intimate actual acts, right? She wants to feel loved and open and have that transparency, where maybe he, as a husband, doesn't a little thick-skulled, doesn't have the patience for that, and doesn't understand that, and just wants the physical aspect and misses out on the openness and the closeness that comes with that act and with that part of the relationship. And so, husbands, we need to understand that what the wife needs in that situation. But wives, you also have to understand through the blue what the husband is wanting, what he needs. And you have to find a balance between those two things. You have to find, just like we said last week with the relationship part, the give and take, right? Being able to supply what your spouse needs because you understand what they need, and that sometimes means giving up what you want and you need. But the goal, once we get on the energizing cycle, is you energize your spouse. Their response is to give back what you need. And when we get to that point, when we're on the energizing cycle, then it's fulfilling. Because you're doing for him what he needs, and he's doing for you what you need. And it's a cycle of good, not a cycle of craziness or bad. So I know this part of, again, I mentioned this already, this part of Cheers is supposed to be directed to the husband, or directed to the wife for the husband. But, and I wrote this down, and I kind of jumped ahead. I laughed when I wrote it down, which usually means it's probably not going to hit. But, it's not just about the husband. It's not only about him. It takes two to tango. It's okay. It's all right. You get it, right? Okay. I laughed. I thought it was funny. Meaning both the husband and the wife need to be aware of what their partner needs most in the physical aspect of it, right? Both of you have to understand what your spouse wants the most and needs the most, and be willing to fulfill that, right? That's part of the exclusivity of the marriage relationship, is you are responsible for fulfilling your husband or your wife's physical needs in that area. That's your job only, no one else's job. No other human being on this planet fulfills that role except for you. And so a good-willed husband, a good-willed wife, a husband and wife that want the love and respect aspect of it will do what they have to, will do what they will want to do, what is needed to fulfill that need of their spouse. They have to be desirous, right? Actively wanting to do that. And it's very easy to get into this part of your relationship and be selfish. Both sides, husbands and wives. It's very easy to be selfish in this aspect. to only be worrying about what your desires are, what your needs are. And it could be emotionally, it could be physically, all that is tied together. It's very easy to get selfish and not thinking intentionally about your spouse, what your partner needs most in those areas. Husbands, you must be willing and ready, really excited, honestly, and anticipating to minister to her spirit in these moments, in the physical realm of your relationship. You have to be willing and excited and anticipating, wanting to minister to her emotionally, to her spirit, to who she is, to love her in that way. And I promise you, if your wife feels that way in those moments and she knows you want to satisfy her emotionally, she's going to be more willing and wanting to satisfy you physically. That because, again, we're on this cycle of God's order, the way he plans it out, and the way that we selflessly engage in those moments, it energizes each other. It gets each other excited, not just physically, but emotionally, and it brings you closer. It bonds that relationship that you have with something that no other human being you have that part of that relationship with. None. This is exclusive to your marriage. So husbands, you got to be excited and wanting to submit or to minister to that part of her. And wives, you must be willing and really excited and anticipating and ministering to him physically. It has to be a desire of yours. Now, I understand. Guys, too, not every day is that a desire. So that's not the number one thing on your list every single day. I understand that. But we have to understand when the other person is in need. And when those times come up, we have to be willing to be selfless in those moments. For your husband, wives, the intimacy is a symbol for his deeper need of respect, right? That closeness that comes with that act, with that physical intimacy is a deep need that he has from you. And it's real easy to go, and even reading this chapter again and kind of going through it, real easy to look at it as, well, just the man just wants what he wants, and that's, everyone else take a hike, fly. But it's not only about that, but it is about that. Not only and exclusively, but it is about that, for sure. And we'll get to Proverbs here in a minute. God understands, because he made man and woman, he understands how men react. He understands how men think. He even understands how men mess up in their thinking, right? How we can become focused on the wrong things in the physical aspect, and how many people have gotten in trouble, have gone astray, have done things they wish they never would have and would never have because of the physical aspect of what a man needs. So this is not me saying, wife, fulfill your husband's needs so he doesn't sin or so he doesn't go off and it's your responsibility to keep him there. No. Guys, it's your responsibility to be a Christian and to fight against those desires that you have that is part of our sin nature. That's all on you, guys. That's not your wife's responsibility. But wives understand, and we'll get to this too, your husband can struggle with those things. And that doesn't mean he's a bad guy. That doesn't mean he's a bad person if he struggles with those things. Even Jesus talked about men struggling with those things. And he gave us as men direction and how to handle those things. But when it comes to that time, intimacy, a wife desires emotional release, right? A wife wants to feel connected and close and open in those moments. And when you are close with her and open with her in those moments, she has that release emotionally that fulfills her, and she feels loved in those moments. And when a man refuses to meet that need, and that's really, we can go all the way back to all of it, the openness and closeness and understanding. When a husband refuses to say, I'm not like that, I'm not built that way, I can't do that, whatever your lame excuse is for not being able to fulfill your wife's need of openness and closeness, when you refuse to do that, she feels unloved. Plain and simple. And it's way harder for her to be wanting to physically be intimate with you when she doesn't feel like you love her. When she doesn't feel like you're willing to put in the time to be close and open with her and fulfill her emotional need for intimacy before any physical moments come up. And so as a husband, if we get that, if we start to understand that, understand how your wife works and are willing to meet those emotional needs and fulfill that so she feels loved, it really, selfishly, it makes it easier on you. It makes it work better. It makes the relationship work better, right? So a wife has those needs and a husband is responsible for meeting those. And a husband desires physical release through that intimacy. He desires that, right? That's part of who he is. So when that need is met, he feels loved and respected. But when a wife refuses to meet that need, right, which it can happen, when a wife refuses to meet the need physically of her husband, it'll leave him feeling that he's not wanted, he's not loved, he's not respected, he's not desired. And that'll leave him in the same position, wives, that you would be in emotionally if he never was concerned about being open or close with you. It's different, but it's the same place that a husband feels when those needs are refused to be met. And that's why we go back to being willing to do what your spouse needs, regardless of where you might even be at in those moments, right? So 2 keys to understanding your husband. You ready for this? Write them down. No, I'm just kidding. 2 keys to understanding your husband. Number 1, realize his sexuality is much different than yours. I don't think that's like a mind-blowing thing that any people that have been married for any amount of time understand. But let's go to Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5, we're going to jump down to, where am I at? Here we go. Drop down to verse number 15. We'll start there. The Bible says, drink waters out of thine own cistern and running waters out of thy own well. Let thy fountains be dispersed abroad and rivers of waters in the streets. Let them be only thine own and not strangers with thee. Let thy fountain be blessed and rejoice with the wife of thy youth. Let her be as the loving hind and the pleasant roe. Let her breast satisfy thee at all times, and be thou ravished always with her love. So you look at this verse, and the verse is being written to a husband and wife, being written to a husband about being satisfied with his wife, and the verbiage is given in physical aspects. Right? The verse is telling the husband physical things about his wife that a husband enjoys, and saying to be satisfied with them because that is how he is made. I don't believe there's a verse anywhere in the Bible that tells a wife to be satisfied with her husband's biceps or his calf muscle or anything of that nature. That doesn't mean, again, that the wife doesn't enjoy the physical aspect or desire physical aspects about her husband, but a husband's sexuality and a wife's sexuality, completely different. And wives have to understand this is how a man works. We are visually stimulated, right? Things appeal to men, and that is how they operate. That is how it begins for them. Again, it doesn't tell the wife to be satisfied with any of her husband's body parts anywhere. Men are visually stimulated. Number 2, the second thing to realize about your husband is he needs physical, intimate release, just as you, the wife, need emotional, intimate release. Right? There's an enjoyment from that act that comes emotionally. It's not a purely physical act. It was never meant to be only a purely physical act. There's a lot of emotions that are tied into physical intimacy. And if you're lacking on that, most likely, husbands, you're the one that's preventing that from being part of the act. Because you're unwilling to be patient, you're unwilling to be who you're supposed to be for her. If that emotional part isn't there, I'm going to guess, not necessarily always the case, the husband, you need to work on that. But for a husband, he needs that physical, intimate release, right? He needs those times. Yes, emotionally he'll benefit from it too, but the physical part of it is where it starts for him, right? And that's part of who he is. When it comes to intimacy, both husbands and wives need to meet each other's needs. Depriving your husband or your wife of an intimate time should never be used as leverage or power moves. It should never be, you're not getting anything today from the wife to the husband. That statement should never be used. That's a weapon. It'd just be like if the husband said, oh, you and I aren't going to be having any meaningful heart-to-heart conversations today. Right? If a husband ever did that, like, oh, I'm not being open with you today. That ain't happening. Wait till you get your attitude fixed, then I'll come and be open with you and start to be close. No, that usually is not the case. But if a husband did that to a wife, she'd be like, "What? Oh, how could you? How could you keep? I need that emotional closeness. I won't feel loved." But I'm not, I don't know how everyone operates, but if you've ever used the physical aspect as a keeping out of reach until he changes, you're wrong. This shouldn't be done that way. That's a power move. That's selfish. That is not what God would have us as Christians do for our spouse. It's not a weapon. It's not a tool to be used in that manner. It's taking those moments and that part of the relationship and taking it way out of context of what God has designed it to be. Now, are there times where you're not ready? You're not in the mood. Things aren't ideal, of course, right? And we have to be understanding of each other. And again, that's being selfless. But if you've ever used it in a manner like that, where you change this or you do this, you won't get this until that happens, then it's being used in an improper way, and that's going to cause strain. It will cause strain. It'll cause the crazy cycle to be ready to spin real quick. And so you've got to be careful to not be the one to do that, to withhold that. So, be the one to initiate, right? Who am I talking to? Both of you, right? Be the one to initiate those moments. That means wives sometimes initiate. Husbands, if you're, I don't know, maybe you've gotten to a place where you just don't initiate for whatever reason, initiate. Your wife wants to feel wanted still, right? And your husband wants to feel wanted. So initiate those times. Initiate. Be the initiator. But understand the emotional needs need to be met. They need to be met emotionally, and the physical needs also must be met. It cannot be exclusively one or the other. Imagine your husband decides not to talk to you in any deep manner for a week. So we aren't going to talk and have emotional conversations for a week or a month or months. There's been no emotional deep conversations. The relationship would be severely strained if there were no emotional deep conversations, open, close conversations for an extended period of time. But how often do we go through an extended period of time where there's no physical releases for the husband? I know maybe it's meddling a little bit. I don't want to know any details or any information of those natures, but I just want you to think about your relationship. I want you to think about where you've been. And probably we've all made these mistakes. We've probably all used it in the improper way. And we've used it in a very selfish way. And I know, we all have. No one's exempt from that. But we need to understand what God's plan for it is and be willing to submit ourselves to that plan and be selfless in this area of our marriage. Be selfless and think about each other more than we think about ourselves. And again, energizing your spouse, fulfilling what your spouse needs is a prime way to get them to fulfill your needs. It's a natural reaction. When you energize your spouse, they will fulfill your needs. They'll be energized, and that will energize you. And that's the goal, right? The energizing cycle is the goal in this part of our relationship. So moving on from that, I want to talk about something where we touched on here in a minute. And if you want to go to Matthew chapter 5, you could do that real quick. We've got about 10 minutes. Matthew chapter 5. And again, talking to the wives, you could wonder, if he loves me, right, as a husband and wife, if he loves me, how can he be tempted by other women? How can he physically be tempted by other women? If he's Christian, if he's devoted to me, he loves me, how can there be a temptation for other women in his mind, in his eyes, his looks, right? We talked about this before with being loyal to our spouses and lingering on the jogger as you drive home a little longer than you should as a husband, and making sure that's not going to make her feel secure, right? So a wife is very, I don't want to be demeaning. It's not like you're sensitive, get over it. But it's sensitive in the way that she wants to know you're hers as her husband. She wants to know she has your heart, she has your eyes, she has your mind, she has every part of you, and it belongs only to her. But the wife realizes the world we live in is constantly trying to pull that away, pull men away physically from God's order. And so a wife can wonder, if he really loves me, how can he even be tempted to look at somebody else or to want somebody else, or to any of those things that fall into that fear and that worry and that insecurity part of a wife. And husbands, you need to understand your wife can be there, and you have to be the man that's manly enough and godly enough to avoid those things. But understand, ladies, and this is not to give an excuse to a husband, because again, guys, be a man and don't give in to those things. But sexuality can become a reason couples are not as close as they could be, right? The lack thereof, or just the improper use of it. It can be a way that it causes division. It causes a wedge between a husband and a wife. And when those times happen, a wife can be worried that a husband will look elsewhere or go elsewhere. And a husband may be tempted to think about looking elsewhere or going elsewhere, right? That's a possibility. And we're talking with improper usage of this part of our relationship, and we're talking about, if we get to that point, being tempted with sin, right? And being what strength do you rely upon as a man to make sure those temptations, when they come, you don't give in to them, because the temptations are there. You could drive down the highway. You can, in your neighborhood, and you could be on the computer. You could be anywhere. You could watch television. You could watch sports, right? And the temptations are there for a man to be swayed, to look elsewhere. And we as men have to understand about us that visually we are stimulated. And that's how men are stimulated. Men may want to be open with their wife, but they may feel like there's some topics that would threaten rather than increase feelings of love. Some women, you might become uncomfortable or even upset or hurt if your husband were to come to you and say, I was tempted by this the other day, or I saw this and it tempted me to look. And if your husband came to you and said that to you, there may immediately probably pops up right away. You'd be hurt and anger and how dare you? I thought you loved me. And those feelings can rise to the surface because you feel betrayed in a way if your husband comes to you and says that I was tempted to do this. But now we want openness, right? You want your husband to be open. You want him to be close. Being tempted to do something and doing it are completely different things. And so in our relationship, we want an openness and closeness where those things can be talked about and be discussed, where a wife is there for support for her husband in those moments. All right? If a husband needs to share struggles he may have with some temptations, rather than the fear or the hurt or the anger, try to understand that he's trying to be open with you and close to you. Now, if he's just admitting he did it and he's like, yeah, whatever, I just want you to know. There's some problems there where, guy, you need to work on yourself, because that's not building or showing love. But we have to understand, depending on how that conversation goes or doesn't go, when he comes to you, he may never come to you again with those concerns or with those struggles of his. If he feels like he's going to, quote unquote, get in trouble, he's probably never going to bring it up again. Because why would he? Right? But if he knows he's got a wife that loves him and knows that he loves her and wants to help him through those times, then that should be a conversation we can have. But instead, a lot of times he'll be afraid of being in trouble in the quiet, and he'll drift off. He'll close down. The stone wall will come out. It'll be quiet. He won't talk about it. He'll feel uncomfortable. And then the wife will wonder, well, what's going wrong? What's the emotional part? He's not being open or close with me anymore. And here we are in the crazy cycle. So Matthew chapter 5, go down to verse number 27. And this is Jesus talking. He says, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." So this is not Jesus excusing it. This is not Jesus saying it's okay. But it's Jesus saying, I know how men are. And wives, you got to know how men are. Again, it doesn't make it okay. Jesus is not saying, I know how you are, so that's fine. He's saying, no, you heard it say that if you do the act, that's adultery. I'm saying if you even look at her in that way, you're on your road. You're in your mind, you're already there. So guys, you need to be careful about how you treat the sexuality part of your relationship. You need to set up guards. You need to do whatever is necessary to prevent yourself from coming to those moments. So that means your mind has to be pure. That means you've got to be in God's word. That means you have to be filtering what you think, what your desires are through God's word in order to cleanse that part of you. Right? You've got that sin. God, if you just be you naturally as a man, when a woman walks by that is dressed inappropriately, you are going to look and you're going to stay looking because you're a man. If you just do what you want, what's natural. But the problem is, or the good thing is you no longer have to do that. You're freed from that because you have the Holy Spirit within you. You have God on your side, and he has given us warnings on how to prevent those things from happening. So when those same temptations come up, if you're in God's word and you love your wife and you're working on that part of your relationship, you're being close, you're being open and intimate, when those temptations come, it's very easy to look the other way. It's very easy not to linger. Now, it can't say you'll never, ever see anything inappropriate. No, you live in this world. It's likely to happen with your permission or not. But you have a choice in how you react when that time comes. And that's why Jesus tells us it's not just about the act. It's about your thought process. It's about your mind. It's about where you are with your emotions, with him, the Lord, where you are with your spouse in those moments. So Jesus knows men are visually stimulating, gives specific warning to be cautious about those things. He doesn't pretend it doesn't exist. Right? God doesn't just ignore it because it's not something he wants to talk about. He knows it's there. He doesn't say it's okay. He just says that's a possibility. That's how men think. And he instructs men, it's not about you physically committing this sin. It starts with your eyes. It starts with your heart. So guard them. Guard your mind. Guard your eyes. Be willing to talk with your husband if he does come to you with those struggles, without him being in trouble or being in the doghouse. Be willing to have those conversations with him. Be happy that he's willing to have those conversations with you, right? Just, you want that openness. You want that closeness. Again, it's not an excuse for a man to follow that temptation into action or physically or with his eyes or with his mind, but it's just a recognizing, words are hard, recognizing each other's needs, right? And striving to meet those needs for each other in the physical realm. So your husband may struggle with those things. I mean, if he's a man, he's probably had to deal with those in his life at some point or another. Right? Hopefully they've dealt with it properly and have done the right thing. But it doesn't always happen that way. And as a husband and wife, you should be able to talk about those things. You should be able to have that conversation and help your husband in those areas. And that doesn't mean you're smacking him around and, making sure he doesn't look or whatever the case may be. It's just having adult conversations of openness and honesty and being willing to help one another in that area. There's probably no more effective way to stay off the crazy cycle and get on the energizing cycle than to have your physical part of your marriage working as God intended. There's probably no easier way to get off the crazy cycle because issues in this part of marriage will spread to other parts. It'll cause frustration and anger and hurt and stress and all the other aspects of a relationship. And often we overlook the physical part of it as it's just like the extra part, right? It's not that integral to our relationship. We got to work on talking. We got to work on our emotions. We got to work on honesty. All those are true. Do not discard or neglect the physical aspect of your marriage, especially wives for your husband. Yes, you need to talk. Yes, you need to be open. Yes, you need to work on the emotional struggles that may exist at times in your marriage. But if you neglect the physical part of it and think that it's not a part of the struggles, you're being ignorant. Because the physical aspect will, especially for a husband, will affect him in other areas of your relationship. If the physical part of it isn't what he needs, isn't fulfilling what he needs from that part of the relationship, it will affect him in other areas, guaranteed. So don't neglect the physical part of it. It's probably the simplest part to. That's probably not true, but it's an easy part to work on and fix and make the way God wants it to be that will help all the other areas of your marriage. So if we go into how he will feel appreciated when he will feel you appreciate his desire for intimacy when you respond to him physically more often and initiate periodically. Typically, the man is the one that's always wanting to have physical relations. And the wife's like, I have a headache today, or I'm tired, or no, I can't, or whatever the case may be. And sometimes those are legitimate reasons. But if you want that part of your relationship to improve, say yes more often and initiate. And husbands, if you're the one that doesn't initiate, you're too tired, or whatever, do something to fix that. Don't be too tired. Initiate. You need it. Sometimes maybe you don't understand that you need it, and you think you could just go with, no, this is a important part of the relationship. I mean, billions and billions and billions of dollars are made and spent on this sexual world. Like, in this world spends billions of dollars. And we get married and we're like, we let it go. We act as if it isn't important. The devil knows how vitally important it is to get your heart, to get your mind. That's why so much is spent on it in every area of our lives, every area of this world. So don't allow, just because now you're married, it should be super important, super enjoyable. It should be a highlight, not a drudgery or a task to accomplish. That's a wrong view to have. So be willing, be ready, be willing to serve, give each other what they need. You understand he needs physical release just as you need emotional release. Again, we've already talked about a lot of these things. But his needs are different than yours. Be willing to fulfill those things. You don't make him open up to you verbally by depriving him of physical intimacy, right? It's not a sword of Damocles. It's not something to hold over his head and say, you're not doing this until you fulfill what I need. Don't use sex in a manipulative way. Just don't do it. Either side, don't do that. You focus on his needs or her needs and desires over yours. And that's the bottom line. When it comes to emotional things, we get it. Like talking about closeness and openness, it's like, yes, that's exactly what I need. Fulfill those needs. But even when it comes to this part of your relationship, be willing to sacrifice for the other person. What they need physically, be willing, be patient, be slow. Whatever is needed, be what is needed for your spouse. You're the only person in this world that can fulfill that. The only person that is made to be that. Why would you not? Why would you fight that? Be willing to give in. Be willing to do what is needed. All right.